Almost everyone agrees on the need to improve education and learning, but there are many different perspectives on how to do it. People with an engineering background often look for ways to improve student performance by optimizing the efficiency of the learning process. People with a business background often propose market-based approaches to education, suggesting ways to incentivize teachers and learners. People with a scientific background often suggest that improvements in our understanding of the brain will lead to improvements in education and learning. My guest on today's podcast, Karen Brennan, draws on a different intellectual tradition, inspired by ideas and practices from architecture and design. She encourages teachers to view the classroom as a design studio, as a place where students can create projects and explore ideas based on their interests, and in the process, develop as self-directed learners. I think this perspective is so important and deserves a lot more attention, so I was very happy for Karen to join the podcast. I've known Karen since 2007, when she started as a graduate student in my lifelong kindergarten research group here at the MIT Media Lab. Karen finished her PhD in 2012, and since then she's been on the faculty at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, just a couple miles away down Massachusetts Avenue. Karen's always had a deep commitment to helping students develop as self-directed learners. To do that, teachers need to play a nuanced role, which Karen describes as a delicate and elusive balance between offering learners the freedom to pursue their own interests and providing enough support for learners to be successful. That delicate and elusive balance is at the core of Karen's new book, Start with Questions, The Classroom as a Design Studio, co-authored with Sarah Blum-Smith. It's also at the core of our podcast conversation, where we discuss how teachers can adopt a design studio approach to help students feel more comfortable and confident in the process of self-directed learning. Near the end of our conversation, Karen reflects on why this design studio approach is especially important in today's fast-changing world, and how self-directed learning and the agency that students develop through it can help in dealing with the technological and political changes that are disrupting today's society. I loved hearing Karen's stories and reflections, and I think you will too. Hi, Karen. Welcome to the Lifelong Kindergarten Podcast, and congratulations on the publication of your new book.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Since the book is, just came out, the book that you wrote with your co-author, Sarah Blum-Smith, and it's called Start with Questions. Actually, I was really drawn to the subtitle, which is The Classroom as Design Studio. Maybe you can start by explaining a little bit about what you mean by design studio and why you think it serves as such a good model for the type of classroom that you would like to support.
Well, it actually starts with the place you are located currently. So I feel like I first experienced design studio culture as a learner myself as a graduate student at the MIT Media Lab as a member of the Lifelong Kindergarten research group that you direct. And it was so characterized by beautiful properties of learning that have just lingered with me in the most powerful ways. You invited us, and I think all students at the Media Lab are so powerfully invited into working on projects independently, but in collaboration with others. You get support and guidance from mentors. And so there's just something about that place and space and the idea of it being a design studio that I have carried with me here at HGSC and into this book in a very powerful way. And so the book itself, please go ahead.
And then trying to share it with, for teachers to be able to implement in their classrooms around the world.
Exactly. And so this book is really a love letter to design studio culture and what that means. This is an approach to learning that I think sort of when you hear its properties feel good to people, but I wanted a shorthand. So having Classroom as Design Studio as the subtitle just felt really important as a way of saying okay, this is what we're aspiring to in learning settings. The other thing I really love about the Media Lab is its interdisciplinarity. I don't know what you're currently leaning into currently as a culture, but like I've heard it referred to at various points in time as anti-disciplinary, adisciplinary, interdisciplinary. And I remember when I first got to the Media Lab, we were introduced to the concept of, and please forgive my very poor French accent here, but le salon des refusés, the people who didn't fit in anywhere else. And I think that is so beautiful, such a testament to the power of bringing disciplines in conversation with each other. That, yeah, as you said, it's not just engineering. It's engineers next to social scientists, next to artists, next to ...
For you, what does that mean when you're trying to give advice for educators in elementary schools and middle schools and high schools? What are the lessons that you learned that then get applied to K through 12 education?
Well, I do think the starting place for me with any advice I offer to teachers, and really the heart and soul of this book, is this core idea of taking learners and ideas seriously. And that can happen anywhere, in any time. But too often, educational spaces, K-12, college as well, I don't think is excluded from this critique, it ends up being very content forward. And starting with learners and the ideas isn't a rejection of the importance of content. You can't have your own ideas without having those in conversation with other ideas. But it's too often sort of the primacy of the curriculum, the primacy of content drowns out young people, their beautiful ideas. So that's what I hope people hold on to, sort of the power and importance and value of each individual learner and what they care about and what they're interested in.
And I think one thing you emphasize in the book is about trying to support self-directed learning experiences. You talk about how the design studio, it supports the joy of learning and connection with ideas, but also it helps people build confidence in themselves as self-directed learners. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And also some of the, sometimes people get confused because they say, well, if it's self-directed, what's the role for the teacher? I think, in there you talk about there's a perceived contradiction between self-direction and support, that just because it's self-directed doesn't mean there's not a big role for supporting learners in that self-directed activity.
The book itself is structured around these 40 different stories, and each story is a question, a vignette of classroom practice that is then put in conversation with theory. And they're all an exploration of this big idea around self-direction and young people being connected to their own ideas in different ways. And so maybe I'll talk about 2 of these 40 stories just to sort of highlight some of the complexity. Okay, cool. So I think one idea that runs across the book is that it is actually incredibly hard to take ownership of your own ideas and your own choices. And the second story in the book is titled, What's Important to You? And it tells, the vignette talks about this elementary STEM lab teacher, who's we call Benjamin in the book. And he's working with second graders, which is a much younger age than I ever worked with. So I always admire teachers who are doing work with the very young kids. And he invited his second graders to create projects about themselves. They're sort of like about me projects. And they start out, they are so excited, they're so jazzed, they have so many ideas. But as they're getting into it, this sort of doubt creeps in, the skepticism creeps in about it. And they ask, really, anything we want, anything we care about, anything we're interested in. And Benjamin has to, the vignette ends with Benjamin affirming that it is okay for them truly to explore whatever they want. And in the book, we connected this idea to the work of John Holt, the American educator. And he offers that this doubt that creeps in is sort of twofold. One, when so many opportunities in schools aren't about you and your ideas, unsurprisingly, you might not be so inclined to trust that that you're actually being invited. So there's just okay, what's the catch? Is this a trick? Are you going to suddenly tell me that there's something else I'm supposed to be doing? So that's part of it. But then secondly, it's often that students don't trust themselves. And there's like incredible responsibility. It can be scary to be responsible for your own learning and your own ideas. So I really appreciate that in these moments where we are confronted by learners and they are sort of skeptical or doubting or questioning, that is not the time to turn away from self-direction. That is the time to give more time and space and support for it. So that's like one idea I think about. And go, please.
Yeah, and talk about, so what do you see as the ways for teachers to provide support in that situation? As the child is going through those types of doubts, either about the overall environment themselves, what are some of the lessons you learned about the role that the teacher can play in supporting through that process?
Well, it actually connects back to exactly what you said at the beginning. Sort of like self-direction as a construct is often misunderstood as being unsupported or like you're on your own. And if you are willing for a bit of a dramatic reading, this is one of my favorite books. This really informed my thinking about self-direction. So for friends who are just listening on audio, this is Malcolm Knowles' 1975 book, Self-Directed Learning. The subtitle is A Guide for Learners and Teachers. And so this is in response to the question, what is self-directed learning? And he writes, in its broadest meaning, self-directed learning describes a process in which individuals take the initiative, with or without the help of others, in diagnosing their learning needs, formulating learning goals, identifying human and material resources for learning, choosing and implementing appropriate learning strategies, and evaluating learning outcomes. Other labels found in the literature to describe this process are self-planned learning, inquiry method, independent learning, self-education, self-instruction, self-teaching, self-study, and autonomous learning. The trouble with most of these labels is that they seem to imply learning in isolation, whereas self-directed learning usually takes place in association with various kinds of helpers, such as teachers, tutors, mentors, resource people, and peers. I just love framing it around helpers. I think that's so beautiful. And so then so much of the book is about the social nature of self-directed learning and what that looks like in the classroom. And so that actually, go, please.
Yeah, and it's really trying to avoid those extremes. So I think sometimes people see this extreme. Self-directed means doing it on your own. And then the opposite extreme is someone's directing you what to do and they're telling you what to do. And too often education is seen in this binary way of one or the other. And I think a big part of the book is trying to add nuance to say it's not about these two extremes.
Exactly. And like, what does that sort of messy middle look like and how is that supported? And so that question of what the role of the teacher is in every single story in the book, because that's what the book is about. But as I was thinking about this conversation, the other story that I was thinking about is titled, That Looks Awesome, What Will Happen Next? And this is the only one in the collection that is sort of an assertion and a question together, and it feels really important to have them together. In this vignette, there's an elementary technology teacher whose students are working on projects all across the year. And the story really traces the teacher's relationship with the students and their evolving confidence and the role of her statements, sort of her supportive statements to them. And we put this in conversation with an excerpt from Paulo Freire, who recounted this tale from his experience as a learner when a teacher of his invited him to talk about his work. And there was just type of a respect and recognition of the work that decades later he still held on to. And so like you and I know very well all of the problems with praise in learning experiences from the wonderful work of people like Alfie Kohn. But this is really about seeing someone. And I think there's, yes, the work of the teachers to support the cognitive work, all of the like interestingness on that side, but it's such deeply affective work, and you have to see and support the whole person.
Yeah, maybe since, as we saw in each of those two stories, it is combining the sort of classroom experience and a story of a teacher in a classroom setting, and a theorist. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about the integrating those together, of both sort of the theory, which is often somewhat about the why. Why is this important? And the practice, which is somewhat more the how to put it into practice. But maybe talk about why you ended up in each of these trying to bring together the theory and the practice.
Yeah. Well, theory and practice in education have long talked past each other, right? They're sort of seen as, oh, it's practice orientation, or you're more interested in the theoretical. And it just feels like so much is lost when we don't create opportunities for them to be in conversation with each other. I really appreciate the ways in which theory can act as a lens to help us notice new things about all of these powerful things that are happening in practice. I think it's often, one of my pet peeves is specifically related to qualitative research is sort of dismissed as anecdotes and not appreciating sort of the profound depth that can be revealed by like carefully studying interactions. And what I think theory helps with, it just like, yeah, it helps us sort of, just see it in new ways, examine it in new ways. So it just felt so important to have these in conversation with each other, and lots of theory. We have 40 different theorists in the book, and just to recognize the like complexity of this work and honoring the fact that there's so many different ways of manifesting this deep commitment to learners and their beautiful ideas.
I think also, as you noted in the stories, you start each of them with a question. But to me, one thing that's important is too often in a lot of traditional educational settings, teachers do ask questions there, but they usually ask questions where they know the answer and they're trying to get the students to say the answer. Maybe if you give some examples, like the questions that these teachers are posing that highlight and start the stories are not ones where the teacher knows the answer, but is to provoke exploration and provoke reflection.
Exactly. That's it's so beautifully expressed that there are a ton of questions being asked in classrooms, but not necessarily questions that are taking learners or their ideas seriously. And I appreciate your connection to the creative learning spiral. And we've roughly sequenced the questions along that arc of from those first initial beautiful moments of imagining through the messy middle of like creative complexity to those moments towards the end where we're sharing and then sort of reimagining and iterating. And so no matter sort of where we are in that creative trajectory along the creative learning spiral, sort of having questions where you are so earnestly and seriously trying to make sense of what matters to this learner, what are they trying to accomplish, how can I be of service to them? And there's just so many ways of getting at all of that interestingness with learners.
Yeah. Actually, for the 40 stories, they were from over like how many different years and different places? Can you just say more about where those stories come from?
The methodology. So it was over about a year and a half with 25 teachers. And so we spent a lot of time with teachers who were just so generous. Teachers are so wildly busy to begin with. And for them to take the time with us, they participated in 3 separate interviews. They collected all of this sort of work product from students. They maintained journals. It's just like layers on layers of data collection with these teachers because we just really wanted to understand what was going on in these classrooms, what made these learning experiences so magical for their students. And these teachers were so different from each other. These were classrooms from across the United States. These were public schools or public charter schools. We didn't want rarefied environments. And I connect this back to where I started, saying like I was first introduced in such a like profoundly powerful way at the Media Lab. Not everyone can go to MIT. Not everyone can be at the Media Lab. And sometimes these approaches to learning get dismissed. It's like, oh, well, you can do that at MIT, or oh, you can do that at Harvard or private schools or whatever. And I was like, no, this really can happen everywhere. Obviously, everyone deals with different constraints and challenges in their environments, but even just like this core commitment of taking learners and their ideas seriously, you can do this in even like the smallest ways and have huge impact on learners and how they see themselves in the world.
I really love that point of that it can happen everywhere because people oftentimes don't appreciate that. I mean, another thing I was thinking about in the book, obviously, I'm often focused in my thinking about the young person who's learning. And I really appreciate the emphasis here about the young person as a self-directed learner and a self-directed creator. But in your book, you focused on that, but you also then applied at the higher level that the book is really about the teacher being a self-directed learner and a self-directed teacher. And
It's
the
so
same way
meta.
you want the teacher to be supporting the self-directed learner, your book is trying to support the self-directed teacher. Maybe talk about that level.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you calling that out. And that's something I experience a lot in my own teaching here at HGSC.
Harvard Graduate School of
Oh,
Education, for those
sorry,
who
yes.
aren't
Yeah.
familiar.
Thank you. We are so obsessed with acronyms. And so I appreciate your help in unpacking the acronyms. And so since I started at Harvard in 2012, I've been teaching a course about these ideas. It's like constructionist course about constructionism. Because I do think for teachers, experiencing it yourself is just such a necessary precondition to supporting it well in the classroom. Like, it is so shocking to me the extent to which we ask teachers to support various sort of innovations and approaches to learning and teaching, but they are brought into professional development seminars where they're lectured at for an hour. So like, what does it mean to learn through creating where I'm being told to do that? And so I think the starting place for so many teachers has to be the experiential. And I really appreciate that just as young learners can experience challenges and struggles with this shift, teachers, adults can also, and in some ways even more so, struggle with it. So I think about this uncertainty and skepticism in my teaching all of the time. And if you will indulge, maybe a tenuous connection. I had sort of like a weird medical thing a few years ago. And I ended up having to see a surgeon about it. It was not serious, mercifully, but it was like enough that I was like, okay, I had this like thing on my face. I didn't look like myself. So I found myself downtown Boston with a plastic surgeon, and he's giving me all this information. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I just wanted him to tell me what I should do. And I was like, what do you think I should do? And he's like, no, like, I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but I can't answer the question of like whether you should go ahead with this. And I remember just being so mad. I was so frustrated that I just wanted to be told what to do. He would not tell me what to do. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is exactly how my students feel when I am like, you have all this choice. I am here to support you. I can answer any question you want except for the question of what you want to do and what's important to you. So I had this like moment of reckoning that it was like actually really hard, that like, and it goes back to the John Holt that I mentioned earlier. It's not always joyful. It's not always fun to be given choices, but it's a practice and it gets easier.
And also, if you're not used to it, I know I visited some, progressive schools that talk about that when new students come there who have been in more traditional schools, it's a really challenging transition because they don't know what to do when they're given the ability to choose and chart out their own paths. It's something that really is on a learned practice, but it's important then to support them in learning how to do that.
Yeah. It ends up feeling more like a burden than a gift. And it's going back to this weird medical story. Like, I was so anxious I couldn't be curious. And to me, I have like continually tried to hold on to that like, yeah, when you are scared, when you are anxious, you are not in a position to be curious, to be a learner, to make good decisions for yourself. And so I think that's where the role of the teacher is so important, where it's like, okay, let me see where you are. What is it that you need?
To make sure you feel comfortable enough to be able to make those choices. Because sometimes,
Exactly.
right, it is scary or you're worried about what will happen. So
Yeah.
trying to create a comfortable space.
Yeah.
Somehow, as you talked about that, it reminded me of another framing that you've used in talking about these issues is about structure and agency, about the wanting to support people developing agency where they can take action in the world. And sometimes people see it as one or the other, that either it's about an environment that has lots of structure to support them, or one that's focused on agency. And these are seen in opposition. I know one thing you've talked about is how those can fit together. And to me, you can talk about how is it that you can put in place structures to support agency as opposed to undermine agency?
Yeah, this, as you know, has long been an obsession of mine now. And it really is the heart of all design work, I think. It's sort of you have a set of constraints, you're trying to sort of manifest particular ambitions. For me, it is really about advancing the project of learner agency or creating the conditions for self-direction. And so it calls back to some of the things we've already talked about as sort of creating supportive structures specifically related to teachers, that you have a teacher who is genuinely curious about what you're interested in and what you care about. It's also like the deeply social nature of learning. So I think peers, I love teachers, clearly, and I think they're incredibly important. I think I want to sort of like amplify the power of peers, which I know is something you also care a lot about, that there's just endless inspiration that can come from peeking over and looking at other people's work and getting feedback from other people. And so whenever you're in a design situation and you're trying to figure out, okay, I want to support learner agency and self-direction, just every time I introduce a new structure, I say like, okay, how is this advancing that project? Who is this benefiting? Who benefits most from this decision? What is this going to look like? I mean, also, I do think all design work is just profoundly iterative. So we try things out. we see how they land. We see how students feel. And I think creating additional opportunities to talk to learners about how did this work for you? How did this feel? Too often in assessment, the learners themselves are kind of afterthoughts when they should be central.
One thing I wanted to ask about was you've been in a special position being a professor at Harvard Graduate School of Education of helping to support the next generation of educators and educational leaders. And actually, it's been wonderful for me to see how your classes have been incredibly popular. So I've come to talk at them, and there's huge numbers of students who are taking it and learning about these ideas. So I want to check with you about, from your experience over the last 10 plus years, working there with these, thousands of students that you've interacted with, becoming on their path towards becoming educators, educational leaders, how they're dealing with some of the big changes going on in the education world and the world at large. Obviously, one thing that everybody is paying attention to these days is the advances in artificial intelligence and the impact it's having on learning and education. I'd be interested to hear about your thoughts on what you've seen, how these future educators are making sense of how they can apply generative AI technologies to their own work and think about how they're going to apply it in the world.
Can I ask you a question first?
It depends on what the question is.
You can edit it out later. Did you watch the Super Bowl?
I did.
Okay, since I haven't had cable for a while, I think I don't really encounter ads, so it was kind of this non-stop blitz of advertising, and I was I couldn't believe how many AI ads there were. And I thought there were sort of two interesting stories being told about AI through my perspective, and I'll be curious if this resonates in general with you. There was one story about sort of efficiency and shortcuts, and sort of oh, this is hey, you don't have to go to work because you'll set your bot off, you'll set your AI agent off to do this work for you. And then there was this other story that was being told that was exploration and personal meaning. It's oh, how do I talk to my mom? How do I start a business? And it was so exciting. And I feel there are sort of similar parallel threads that educators are dealing with, right? It's sort of okay, in ways that are both exciting and concerning to people. There's so much like borderline moral panic around cheating and young people subverting their learning. We're also dealing with that in higher education. But I am personally, as someone who's really excited about how people learn through making things, I am incredibly excited about those opportunities and creating those opportunities for our learners themselves and helping them learn how to make good decisions about those things.
Jade, I really like the point that I do think that, as with many new technologies, the technology really can be used to amplify very different educational pathways. If you're into efficiency and optimization in education, AI is for you. But as you're saying, if you're into supporting student creativity and voice, if you bring it into their, students can use it, if done the right way, to support that and amplify that as opposed to constrain it or undermine it.
Yeah. How are you thinking about that in your own work and interactions?
Well, I mean, I do have concerns because I feel that in some ways the easiest things to do is often to just re-amplify some of the existing approaches in school settings. So I really worry about this much more than, of course, there are problems with, cheating or wrong information. To be honest, I worry more about AI being used to further entrench what I see as an already, outdated approach to education, where the focus is on just better delivery of information and better delivery of instruction. And it can improve on those things, but I think it's going to be harder to displace them with the more self-directed approach to learning that you're advocating in your book. But what have you seen among your students? I seem to remember you interviewed a bunch of students and faculty at Harvard about their use of generative AI on their own projects. Or I don't know if you also talked about how they would want to use it with students. What type of things have you seen?
Yeah, so generative AI came to Harvard in a big way in sort of fall 2023. The institution made a variety of tools available to students, which was incredibly exciting. And so the researcher in me was like, ooh, like what are people actually doing with it? And so that was fall of 2023, sort of the first few months of 2024, exactly as you said. We interviewed, I think, students, 7 faculty members about their experiences with generative AI and specifically student-directed projects, because Gen AI can be used in all sorts of ways, but I was really interested in hey, if we're taking learners, their ideas, and how those get manifested through projects seriously, what does that look like? And knowing how quickly these tools and their uses change, I really love going back to this project to even see how perceptions and use have changed, because it feels like a bit of a time capsule now. It's like those were the very early days and how people were making sense of them. And even in these early uses, I just so profoundly appreciated the sensitivity that both students and faculty were bringing to the trade-offs. It's sort of like, okay, I can turn things over to generative AI in the name of efficiency, and particularly our poor students. They are taking so many classes. They have so many competing demands on their times. They're trying to make the most of their time here. They're trying to sort of engage in really deep learning, but there's so many things to be doing. And so they were sensitive to the fact that wow, this can help me do things, but also I might be unintentionally undermining my learning. And so this ongoing grappling with what do I really want for myself? What are the moments where it's okay for me to turn things over to Gen AI potentially as a creative collaborator, as a partner? And when are times I'm maybe not making the best choices for myself as a learner?
But I do like that you were looking at specifically in the context of student-directed projects, because oftentimes it gets looked at in other contexts. So it's great to get a clear sense of the different ways it can, integrate into that process. I know you also taught a course more recently specifically on vibe coding, which has gotten a lot of, visibility in the last year about a way of sort of being able to code without the traditional approaches of of writing lines of code, but just to be able to make dynamic, interactive things in a more conversational way. What type of things did you learn in exploring that?
Yeah. Well, the course itself is part of like a much longer trajectory for me of helping people learn how to express themselves through code. So I was a CS major in college, and I always think about my very first assignment, which was like computing the volume of a sphere or something. Like I had a lab book. I had to copy like the lines of code from the lab book into the terminal. And it was just like, you wouldn't think it was exciting, but I found it so profoundly exciting that it was this just like powerful moment of creating something that had an effect in the world. And I wanted to help other people have that experience. So got involved in teaching programming as an undergrad at University of British Columbia, no acronyms, and which eventually led me to you, into lifelong kindergarten, and to Scratch. And that was so beautiful because all of the things that I had seen people be so demoralized by in CS education and programming, like, oh, the syntax is such a bummer, and it's like it's so hard for me to express my ideas. And suddenly Scratch made it possible to express your ideas more easily and to use code in new ways. And so now we find ourselves in the present moment where, okay, we've gone from text-based languages to block-based languages to using natural language to creating digital artifacts. And so that was sort of the foundation for this course that I taught with my wonderful doctoral student, Jacob Wolf. This course would not have happened without Jacob on so many fronts. So I have to recognize him. That just wanted to create a space for our students here at HGSC who have so many wonderful and beautiful ideas, but during my time here, it has not been super accessible to, like, you want to build an app, you want to build a website. Like, some of the students were able to do that, but it felt sort of inaccessible, unattainable. And so we designed this course, 6 weeks. Every week we did a different project on a different theme with a different tool just to see what is possible in terms of generative AI as a creative partner in building things.
And did you end up feeling more optimistic or less optimistic by the end of the course about the possibilities of, Gen AI and vibe coding?
I think I'm in general like a very optimistic person, so I was really excited about it. But the purpose of the course actually was to hold the complexity in the middle. Like, both Jake and I wanted to defend against like boosters and doomers. It's like you have to be thinking about all of the complexity, the environmental impacts, the ownership and authorship. But we also want you to be really excited about what is possible. So it's like, I think students often left class feeling like, I feel excited, but I also feel really complicated. I have complicated feelings about it.
I heard somebody refer to it as magic and tragic. And it probably is a combination of both.
Yes, yeah. And I think it's our responsibility to see both the magic and the tragic.
Maybe one last area I was going to ask about. In some ways, AI represents one major disruption happening in society today.
Yeah.
In my mind, the other big disruption happening in society today is the rise of authoritarianism around the world and the threats to democracy. And I feel that education can play a really important role in this. So I want to think, as you're trying to work with, again, future educators, educational leaders, what are the ways that you're trying to help them deal with the world that they are entering? And how do you see their thinking evolving?
What a beautiful question. Well, I think what is so powerful about Design Studio as metaphor and design as practice is that in many ways I think of it as a fundamentally optimistic view of the world. You're seeing the world not as it is, but as it might be. And I think that type of optimism through design, conscientious optimism, intentional care in design, is such an important defense against these moments. And this idea of being self-directed, that you have agency in the world, is a powerful response to the hopelessness and despair that I think is really easy to slip into. And if you are willing to indulge another story, I think.
Please.
So we're going to go in the time machine. It is January 2017. Donald Trump has just taken office. And I don't know. I can't remember exactly how many people were on Boston Common, but this is part of the Women's March across the world. So probably 175,000 people have gathered on Boston Common. And I have this acute memory of being in this enormous crowd. And we've gathered, people are so grateful to be together. And we're supposed to be marching. It's a march. And we're not marching. And so the crowd starts chanting, "Let us march. Let us march." And then I don't know exactly where or how it changed, but someone started a counter chant that was, "Let's go march. Let's go march." And so this shift in language felt like such a powerful shift in perspective. Sort of "let us march" is deferential, it's about permission. "Let's go march" is action oriented, the agency is within us. And so that's what I think about that moment all of the time in terms of what can I do in this moment. I don't have to feel despair. I don't have to feel hopeless. I can collect other people and we can go march together. But yeah.
Yeah, no, I love that story. And I do like the emphasis coming back to the idea of the design studio, of emphasizing agency, of having people develop their voice, being able to make their own choices and taking charge of things, which is, it does feel really important to highlight that in today's world where it does feel more important than ever for people to be able to go up and feel that they have their voice and to take charge of things.
How are you dealing with the present moment?
Yeah. Well, again, trying to see in everything we do how to help people develop their voice and to be able to make their own choices. So I do think trying to keep that in mind in whatever it is that we do. And maybe, again, since you're working with educators, there is a book that came out just recently. Randy Weingarten, the head of American Federation of Teachers, had a book that's called "Why Fascists Fear Teachers."
Yeah.
So I guess maybe my final question is about, are you helping to develop the next generation that will be feared in a positive way?
I love it. I mean, I hope so.
Yeah.
That is the truth. I don't know if I would have framed it that way myself, but I'm on board. So I'm happy to co-sign on that as an ambition.
And okay, well, maybe just to end with just stepping back, I always like to end just with giving some advice, since a lot of since your book that came out is really aimed at teachers, to support teachers as self-directed learners, self-directed creators. Thinking about if you just want to encapsulate some advice you would give educators at this moment, what's the most important thing for them to be keeping in mind?
I think the work of teaching is so incredibly hard. And I think especially if you're trying to do something that's a little countercultural, especially in K-12 schools, that's an additional layer of challenge. And so I think about all the ways in which teachers need to sustain themselves in this incredibly challenging work. And my sort of pop cultural reference for this is there's this wonderful cartoonist named Matthew Inman. I don't know if you know him. He also goes by The Oatmeal. And there's this one piece of his that I often think about for myself, but I often recommend it to my students as well. And it's entitled "Creativity is Like Breathing." And it starts out, creativity is like breathing. When you're making stuff, you're exhaling. But you can't exhale forever. It's that's not how bodies work. You can't constantly be exhaling. Eventually, you have to breathe in. And breathing in can look like lots of different things. You can like work on different projects, you can hang out with people, you can be in different places, you can listen to podcasts, you can read books, and breathing in makes us better at our breathing out. It makes us better at what we do. So I think in all things, don't forget to breathe in and breathe out. Don't forget to sustain yourselves.
I think those are great words to end with. So thanks so much for joining Lifelong Kindergarten Podcast.
Thank you so much. It was such a joy.
The Lifelong Kindergarten Podcast is produced by Mitchell Resnick and Eric Schelling in the Lifelong Kindergarten Research Group at the MIT Media Lab. You can find other episodes, additional resources, and online conversation in our Substack at bit.ly/LLK podcast.